If you'd like to participate in the discussion or leave us feedback, you can contact us at levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook at facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. If you like the content and want to hear more of the show, subscribing will ensure you don't miss an episode. New episodes come out almost every Wednesday. Also, please review, tell a friend about the podcast, or share with your gaming group. Now sit back and enjoy the episode.
Welcome to the Level Up Your Gaming Podcast. My name is Aaron, and joining me once again, I have Josh. Josh, how are you doing today?
Man, the weather is so nice, and I am so full, just like incredibly full. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I pulled you in from the very nice weather at the moment.
Yeah, we went out. You know, it's beautiful outside. It's bright. It's cheerful. Everything's growing. We've got chickens. You know, and they're getting big. And the grass is green and the leaves are blooming and the trees look amazing and everything is full of life and it just feels very like all on brand.
Oh, very thematic, you mean?
You know, like there's one common thing going on and everything around me sort of feeds into that, so it becomes richer, a stronger vibe, if you will.
Okay. All right. So, today we're going to pay off our last week's episode about using our themes. As you can tell, Josh always has a good segue into this. He's thought long and hard. He always improvs a segue here.
I do it on the spot. I literally like, oh shit, what are we talking about? Okay, let's come up with something. Yes.
Last week we had actually stopped talking about when you write yourself into oblivion, because we were about to talk about the solution for it, or a solution for it, which is to use themes to give your story depth. And so that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, I kind of would like to start off with examples. Like examples in either existing roleplay or in media. And one of the things that pops into my head very often is Brennan Lee Mulligan. Do you know Brennan Lee Mulligan? Mm-hmm. A lot of his stories have a underlying distrust or disgust with capitalism.
Okay.
And I think that theme that runs through a lot of it is super powerful and really nice, because it all fits with sort of a narrative that he's put forward. You can see themes like that where you've decided on like a plan, a plot, and your story revolves around that, the characters revolve around that, the history of the world revolves around that. It all feeds back into the same idea. And I think that's really what I want to talk about today is using all of those aspects of storytelling to build a more enriched story. And like Brennan Lee Mulligan does a great job of it. I don't see it so much with a lot of like Matt Mercer in Critical Role, because their stories are big, they're huge, they last way too long, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know he's tried to do the whole found family thing, but that's sort of an organic thing that happens because his players bring it up.
Mm-hmm.
But he also writes his stories giving them a lot of opportunity to shine as individuals rather than as, like, let's show my story off sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's just a thought that I've had in my head about, the different types of live plays or podcasts or, YouTube, Twitch streams or whatever.
Okay.
Have you seen any of these games?
I do not listen to live plays. Thematically, I'm trying to think of when you say this, like, what's the theme that you're trying to go for? And I guess, theme is kind of the overarching like concept to your story or what you're trying to achieve. So like I guess like one time a chain of my stories thematically would have had like eldritch horror and like that type of like, you know, theme to it. So like although the entire flavor of the game was our underlying detective series, the overarching feeling that I was going for was that sense of you are fighting against something that is so large and so powerful that even you can't defeat it, but perhaps only hold it at bay.
Yeah, I get that. When I wrote my Cyberpunk campaign, um, the plot itself was about, an AI that was being used to subvert uh, communications and sort of take over a city. But I put a lot of theming about military industrial complex, you know, using whatever means necessary to sort of further themselves. And I built that into not just the main story, but a lot of the background, the side characters, and sort of the environment that the characters were in. And yeah, I've used things like that before, and I think it's really effective to showcase what sort of emotions or style you're going for in a game, and it gets your players really in the mood to sort of explore that space. I know.
Yeah.
I've also did that in the desert campaign, but that one was more like unscrupulous people use whatever trauma you have to their own advantage.
Okay.
And while that's a little bit more of a heady theme, I think it really like reached out into each one of the players had to, because I spent a lot more time on backstories and there's a lot more character driven as a story. There was an overarching story. There was, cultists and weird religions and, generational trauma, but unscrupulous people taking advantage of people's trauma for their own needs, their own ends, was really the core theme that I spent a lot of time building into that campaign. And it allowed the players to really explore their own characters' trauma and like why they were the way they were, built them up as characters. I think it was a lot more fun that way.
No, I agree with that. I mean, again, the whole purpose to the theme is, again, tying this back into the last episode we have, is it gives you some guardrails to kind of work with in terms of setting up your story as a whole. So you're no longer trying to mash a bunch of ideas that perhaps have no cohesive thought or narrative together with. And instead, now you're trying to build your narrative around the generalized theme. So now everything, like, what do I need to actually execute to be able to convey this to my players? And then, like, how does that theme, translate into what my players are probably going to do and how they're going to interact with the story itself. So it gives you ideas on how to build your story better, like from that perspective.
Yeah. I know we've said before that you can take one shots or even short adventures and slap them together as long as you give them a through line, something that connects them. And that's what a theme really does, is if you come up with like, okay, I want to do a theme on the death and rebirth, or like the rise and fall of heroes, or something like that. You come up with an idea, what you want to do, and then you can pick and choose stories that match that, or you can add that in as flavoring for what's going on around you. And it really does mean that each of those little bits and pieces of stories that you've amalgamated into your narrative, you can use those things to time together, and it really feels more like a solid, cohesive piece if you match a theme. If you are just jumping from adventure to adventure to adventure, I mean, you get Saved by the Bell. where no two episodes have anything to do with each other except the characters are the same.
Yeah. Again, the theme does really bring everything together. It makes things cohesive. It makes things make sense. And again, that doesn't mean you can't do a monster of the week sort of thing. But this is about how you're trying to solve structuring your game and not getting lost in 15 games later. So,
Exactly. Yeah, if you are writing a story, sometimes I get an idea and oh man, that's a cool concept. I want to do something with that. And then, like we said last week, I will full on head down as fast as I can, run directly into writing stupid amounts of notes, backstories, location information, details about people, histories, motivations, none of which necessarily gets me any further into actually writing a game. Planning out what the characters are doing. I'm building history. When we talked about last week was, writing an outline, coming up with a couple of narrative decisions, sticking with the rule of 3, deciding, we're going to have this many encounters, we're going to have this many types of encounters, we're going to follow some rules so we can match stuff. But to make those things make sense, I can say I'm going to follow the rule of 3. I'm going to have 3 clues, I'm going to have 3 encounters, and I'm going to get to a place where I can start the next chunk of my story. I'm going to have 3 sections in the beginning, 3 sections in the middle, 3, 3, all over the place. But if you're just making sections and just slapping them together, it's going to feel like that. It's going to feel like, you reached into a Lego bin and you pulled out pieces and they're all different colors and you just built a, amalgamation out of it. It could look cool, but if they all follow like the same theme, it's going to look a lot cooler.
Yeah,
your players are going to get more involved.
Yes, I agree. Again, themes help bring players into the universe and the storyline that you're trying to tell. Without the theme, it's not that players can't be invested in what they're like encountering and working through, because you might have a bunch of really self-motivated people who just want to do whatever they want to do. And you might not need a theme for that. You can run like a true sandbox game, but in a lot of cases I have found that being able to explain what's going on as time goes on, like there's a connection point throughout your game at which players realize this plus this plus this all makes sense together because of the big, overarching thing that's going on. And that is your theme there. And so players will pick it up after a couple times seeing, the pieces of the puzzle that lead to that. And I think that discovery is really, really interesting, at least for me when I play as a player. That's like wow, the big connection is to what you're trying to achieve as the GM. I go, that's really cool. But at the same time, I'm not saying that you don't have to do that, but it's just there is something very very cool about being able to identify that as you encounter more of the story and being able to put it together and being able to see oh, okay, this is all has to do with this. And it's almost like a learning point for your characters, to be able to be okay, your players are now engaging with this in a completely different way.
Yeah, I think it's I've played games where it's just been a series of adventures or an adventure. They're just off to do a thing because it's adventurous, right?
Mm-hmm.
And other games that have sort of a secondary plot or a theme that goes behind it that sort of ties it all together. And the difference is night and day when you realize it. When you don't realize it, it's still a stark contrast. It just feels like a better story.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, definitely when you realize that theme is there and what the author, the game master, is trying to accomplish, is trying to tell you, it gives so much more depth to it. And I think part of that also is tropes.
Mhm.
I know I've talked quite a bit about, utilizing tropes and following tropes. The whole purpose being a trope is like these are common story elements that are expected or fill in some of the ludonarrative that
Mhm.
goes on. We expect a thing to happen, so it should happen, and when it doesn't happen, it feels awkward or weird, which might be what you're going for. But when it does happen, when a player expects a thing to happen and it does, it reinforces, the story for them.
Yes.
And it does give them a sense of like, I've figured something out. I understand what's going on. It's that really nice feeling when you've put two and two together and you found that it actually does equal 4, and everybody else is wrong. You knew it all the time. It's great. And we're here to tell a story for our players. We're here to have a good time, and there's nothing greater in the world than, figuring something out from scraps. It feels so good to figure it all out. And if you lay out the pieces and you get a good theme going in the background, your players can get a lot more information conceptually and build a story out of that. So how do we do that?
Yeah.
How do we decide on a theme, first of all, and then use that to tell a story? What sort of themes do you like, Aaron?
I mean, again, it sort of just depends on the flavor I'm trying to convey. So, like, time travel is a theme. So, like, I've
Mhm.
leaned into that before. As like I said, I leaned into the Eldritch Horror thing for a little bit. The hero's journey is a theme. You can play that. Like those are all like ones I've done. I sort of look at the base game that I want to do. You generally come up with it right off the top there, but like, speak to something that you have interest in telling. Okay. Because otherwise you're going to try to fit a bunch of stories into a theme and you're going to hate it. It's like, it's the same problem of like just telling games that you absolutely despise telling. Don't put yourself in that position. Find something that you find cool or that you think is enjoyable to tell, and then tell stories around that theme.
Yeah. I like philosophy. I like, light politics, a little bit of religious overtones, things that people recognize, and try and tell stories around that. One that I'm working with is, everything that's happened has happened before. Nothing's new.
Okay, yeah. Again,
Okay.
things that feel the cool thing about the theme is that it can be very relatable to your real life, and thus making the game more approachable and accessible. So you're like be able to put yourself into the character in the world even more.
Yes. Which, if you want a good example of this, read some Terry Pratchett. Go find yourself some Discworld and read some Discworld. Because a lot of the stories you see in there are about real world things, but taken to a fantasy extreme. And when you realize what the story is actually about, it gives that same sort of accomplishment. Like, I figured this thing out that I was talking about before. And if you can get that to your players by theming your story, it can be really fun. But yeah, I do like philosophy. I like picking a philosophy and sort of building something around it. I know some people also do emotion. I think it's better for shorter games because emotions change, and it's hard to keep a single emotion for like long periods of time. But
Mhm.
like a a one shot that's based around sadness or loneliness or fear or anger. You can even set those things up in sort of individual scenes. Maybe you could do something around the stages of grief.
Mm-hmm.
That's really fun and interesting. You can have they each encounter the different bargaining and acceptance. You can find ways to pick emotions or concepts and translate those into story bits. It's gonna help tie scenes together and give you a way to build your characters. Right?
Yeah.
I think, other than emotions and philosophy, and story concepts, I don't know off the top of my head any other great ways to theme things. This is a narrative focused medium. I'd love to say we can use like a green theme or like colors or sounds or anything like that, but it's difficult in a narrative focus. It requires words and concepts, and it's a little more esoteric than something you can see or touch or taste. A role-playing game entirely based around taste. I don't even know how you would do that. Be so weird. I like it. Anyway,
every game has a charcuterie board that's themed appropriately for your night. Yeah.
And depending on what people take, you've only got so many pieces of cheese before you die. Oh my god, that's such like real life. You only have so many pieces of cheese before you die.
It's true.
Don't know how many that is.
Again, you can do thematic things that are not as narrative focused. Like you could do a very combat focused game that that there is not very much narrative. The theme to it is like the constant combat within the game.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, it's a very shallow theme. And ideally what you'd probably want to do is elevate that to an extent where it does drive narrative, which is you're in a world of combat. And why is this thing happening? Like, why do you keep entering into like these battle royales and everything is so chaotic and violent?
I mean,
there's
tie directly back into, how you want to resolve your story. Hey, if everything's violent all the time and you've got this constant state of needing to battle, that the entire world and the entire structure of society is based around these constant conflicts, what is the escape? What is the solution? And now you've written an interesting story. It's a very shallow concept that you've given some serious depth to, and it's interesting now. So
yeah, again, that's sort of the way the theming works, is that you don't have to have it be, doesn't have to be this like crazy, like crazy high level story. You can make a very shallow theme and run with it, and it can become something very engaging, but it does still it gives you the guardrails that you want to have within your game. So you have a cohesive way to write your game. You don't want to get like, you don't want to care about what's outside of the fence line, basically, necessarily. It's not that isn't useful, but in order to successfully establish your game, making sure that everything fits within these lines is a good set of ways to follow some rules and stick with, again, a cohesive narrative within your game.
Mm-hmm. So how do we use themes? How do we take a theme and turn it into, story beats? And I think that's really like you've got a story concept. You've written a couple of outline points, like here's where I want the characters to go. Here's sort of what I want them to do. And then you're like, okay, what is my through line? What is the common element that I'm going to tell through this? My build and my resolution around this philosophy or this style or this idea. I think the big thing to do, like we talked about with, the combat one, or we talked about with some of the other ones that we've got there, is you can take that emotion, that theme, that color, that flavor, and you can apply it to the world. You can apply it to the scenes that they're in. You can apply it to the characters. You can apply it to the way the encounters happen. Okay, what sort of puzzles they're into. Use it as a brush stroke to sort of give background to everything that's in your world. And that way, the things that don't match that, they stand out more. The pops of color in your world, if they were. So you can bring attention to bits of the story that you want to, like, hey, I'm telling a story about loneliness. Okay. I'm going to choose loneliness as the story. And this is an empty sort of world. The characters have come together. They're on a long journey through desolate post-apocalyptic wasteland where they encounter different wanderers who are desperate for attention, but also incapable of making any sort of connection with other people because of the world. Right? Okay, now I've taken loneliness. I've built sort of a feel for the world, right? And so what is the resolution to that is that they've got to make a connection. They've got to find a society, the last group of people, and make that sort of family connection. And so throughout the story, you can pepper those ideas in, because if you've got these vast empty wastelands where things are not able to work with each other or connect, plants won't grow, animals just like are having a hard time of things, animal babies are being left alone and the parents run off, so there's like nobody's taking care of the children, sort of thing. Encounters are very sparse. You keep giving the same sort of loneliness theme throughout the whole ordeal. So when you see the antithesis of that peppered into your story, it becomes bright. It becomes easy for your characters to pick up on. And now you've got not only a theme for your game, not only something that can give life to the world that you're in, it can be used to sort of design your NPCs and how they're going to interact, to lay out what types of encounters you're going to have, the items that are going to be in your game, even the language or the weather that you're going to talk about, right? But it also can give you a way forward to like write your interesting set pieces that really pop for your players and make it more fun to like make those connections.
Yeah, no, I mean, I hear what you're going for there. Again, it's you're asking at the very beginning of the whole thing, like, how do you use your theme, basically? And maybe when you start with your outline, you don't even have the theme figured out. But I think like working backwards from it, how do you even come up with your theme? Well, you had that cool idea for a one scene or two scenes. Just, look at that and say, do these things relate in some way? And then can I make this into a story? And then you can build your story from there. Like, it's hard to funnel players into that one really cool scene, those two really cool scenes. but they can be great starting off points to be able to be like, oh, this is the thematics of the game itself, and this is how I'm going to structure my beginning and my end. And should the players hit one of these scenes, that's great, but now I've got like life to the entire story. It's got legs now because I know how to get it from point A to point B, because these are the things I want to touch on just based on these two scenes. So it becomes very easy in that regard. It's a, and then like you said, like how do you want to, once you have a theme, you want to intensify around the theme. So everything, should have some tie back to it. So there's payoff for everything you do. So, if you have the theme, like the opposite is there. If you have a theme that you want to work with, you have to then come up with stories that have payoff into that theme. So like, that's how it works. You just want to make sure that your players get something out of the experience of having been, having explored, this world that you've created, and then having engaged with the theme that you put in front of them.
Yeah. Now the exploring the theme, having it exist throughout the story, building it up. There's a number of different payoffs for your players. First, like we've talked about, is when they recognize that there is a theme and they understand, how things are working, and they see something, they expect something, and that they get that payoff from it happening. The recognition is great. There's also callbacks, because you've got a theme, because you've got a through line through your story. You can call back to things that happened earlier and express that theme in new ways, or possibly because the players have interacted with it, they've changed it somehow. And those callbacks are super important for your players as well, because that reinforces the theme for them, right? It can give that sort of that feeling of nostalgia from something that happened maybe even 20 minutes ago, but it's new and it's interesting because you've made that change, because they've altered it by their existence, or we're tying back to something they saw before, but now they're seeing it new light because they have grown, because they've got this new experience that they've encountered. And then the last big thing for themes, this big payoff, is making your enemies, or possibly even just your big bad evil guy, sort of the personification of your theme, right? So that if you've got a specific thing that you want your players to fight against, or to see that it's bad or evil, or work towards, or whatever it is, making your encounters, or your bad guy, or whatever it is that they're fighting against, something they can actually fight against, and express it that way, they can get some real sense of accomplishment by defeating it and seeing the change that they've made in your world.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I mean, again, if you have a thematic thing, it doesn't make sense for your big bad evil guy to be the monkey master or something like that. There's no, like,
I mean,
in your loneliness campaign, unless like he overcame loneliness by having so many monkeys. I don't know. Like, this is.
I don't know.
But,
I don't know. I could probably come up with a Monkey Man theme that fits the Med Loneliness campaign. But yeah, no, you definitely need to tie, if you're tying your simple encounters, or your NPCs, or your social encounters, your puzzles, all back to the same theme. There's no reason that your big bad evil guy shouldn't have that as well, but to a much higher degree, and to the point where your players defeating him is overcoming that theme, is getting that antithesis to the theme that's going to make it feel really good for your players. They've accomplished something. They've beaten, the true ennui of this universe.
Yeah.
Once
No,
again,
it's again. It is the big bad evil guy is generally the culmination of your game. The fight against them will be the culmination of your game. So it makes sense if they are thematically the right, like if they are thematic, if they are in line with your theme, then you are either defeating, the bad side of your theme, or you're overcoming your theme, or whatever it might be. It just makes sense that they would be, strongly tied into the theme and sort of personify it.
Yeah. Your loneliness campaign could have some sort of monster that strips away the ability for creatures to communicate with each other, right? So your players are losing the ability to communicate with each other, and they may be shouting commands at each other, and it's all gibberish. And that's sort of the what's going on, is they're losing that connection they've made. In your never-ending battle planet, you could have that undead emperor on the throne who's just sending waves and waves of bad guys at you from like a forge underneath his throne or whatever it is. And there's no defeating him through fighting because of how it is. It is a never-ending cycle of battle. That's what the whole world is. And so this gives not just an interesting battle encounter, but also it gives interesting ways for conflicts to be resolved that don't necessarily map with, well, I'm just going to punch it until it dies, or I cast, fireball and just nuke it. You can add in alternate ways to defeat some of these things, because now you've got a theme. Now you've got a concept that you're fighting against. Well, what fights that concept? How do your players overcome that idea? And that's a much, much more interesting story. It's going to have a lot more depth. It's going to make your players feel more interested in what's going on. I think it's a great way to pay off, some of these interesting stories that you can have.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. Again, these are just good ways that you can use, your theme and be able to, again, put the appropriate rails on your story, or put the appropriate boundaries on your story, so your story makes cohesive sense. Do you have anything else you want to add to this, Josh?
No, but I kind of want to make that monster that steals my players' ability to communicate with each other. I think that's it's going to be super fun. I think that's going to be
a very interesting final encounter for sure.
I think it would be more like, a series of encounters over like they're in their final section of the game. They got to like work through a bunch of encounters, and the guy keeps coming in and like knocking away their ability to do things together until, the final encounter, and they can't communicate with each other at all, and they've got to sort of come up with other ways to communicate, thus defeating him.
Mm-hmm.
Because the only way to take out a guy that prevents you from being able to communicate is by a coordinated attack.
That's true.
Themed.
There you go. And that's how it's done, ladies and gentlemen. So if you have thoughts on themes, or using themes, or your favorite themes to use for a story, let us know. levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com or facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. Also, the podcast is on YouTube, so you can smash the like button there. Otherwise, recommend it to a friend. Subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcasting site, review it, and all those good things. And that's going to wrap us up for the week. So for Josh, I'm Aaron. Have a good week, everyone.
Bye.